Elena, before we continue, your role has been made redundant. Mark Ellison's voice was smooth, almost apologetic. I stood at the front of the boardroom, my final slides still glowing on the screen behind me. 9 executives stared at me with varying degrees of shock and discomfort. My mouth went dry. The projector hummed in the silence. I'd just spent 40 minutes presenting the restructuring plan that would save Ellison Group from collapse. The plan I'd worked on for 6 months. The plan that kept me awake until 3 in the morning most nights. And now Mark was firing me with it. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the presentation clicker. I'm sorry, what? My voice came out steadier than I expected. Mark folded his hands on the table, his face professionally neutral. The restructuring you've designed is excellent. We'll be implementing it immediately. But as part of the cost-cutting measures, we've had to make some difficult decisions about senior roles. I felt the floor tilt slightly beneath me. You're firing me with my own plan? The sound of cardboard scraping against my desk was louder than it should have been. HR Representative Sharon stood awkwardly near my door, watching me pack 18 months of work into a single box. My hands moved mechanically, dropping framed photos and notebooks into the container. Colleagues walked past my office, eyes darting away when I looked up. The guilt was thick enough to taste. I'd mentored half these people, recommended 3 of them for promotions. Now they couldn't even meet my eyes. My assistant Maria lingered in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. This isn't right, she whispered. I forced a smile that felt like broken glass. It's business, Maria. Just business. But my jaw was clenched so tight my teeth ached. Sharon cleared her throat. We'll need your badge and laptop before you leave. I nodded, carefully placing my son's drawing of me at my desk on top of everything else. The crayon letters read, Mom's saving the company. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. Rain hammered against my windshield like bullets. I sat in the parking garage, engine running, unable to move. My reflection in the rearview mirror showed mascara streaks and eyes that looked hollowed out. I'd held it together in the office. Smiled at Sharon. Hugged Maria. Shook hands with security. But now, alone in my car, the dam was cracking. My phone buzzed. Mom calling. I couldn't answer. Couldn't explain how I'd been fired from the company I'd helped save. Couldn't admit that I'd been so focused on proving myself that I'd missed every warning sign. The phone stopped ringing. Started again immediately. I turned it off. Mom, I'll explain later, I whispered to the empty car. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The company would implement my plan. Mark would take credit for it. And I would disappear from the story entirely, edited out like a mistake. I finally put the car in drive and pulled out into the rain. My name is Elena Ward, 41 years old, single mother, former chief strategy officer at Ellison Group. I built the restructuring plan that would make the company look invincible. I identified every problem, designed every solution, and projected every outcome. And then Mark Ellison erased me from it. I'd been with the company for 8 years. Started as a senior analyst, worked my way up through pure determination and late nights. I was the only woman on the executive team. That should have felt like an achievement. Instead, it felt like being a target. My ex-husband left when our son was 2. Said he couldn't handle my ambition. My mother worried I worked too much. My friends said I was too trusting. But I believed in meritocracy. I believed that good work would be recognized and rewarded. I believed that saving a company would secure my place in it. I was wrong about all of it. Sitting in my apartment that evening, I finally opened my laptop and stared at my copy of the restructuring plan, the one I'd backed up before the presentation. 6 months earlier, the office had a different energy.
Hope, maybe.
Or desperation disguised as optimism. Mark had called me into his corner office on a Tuesday morning. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, making his mahogany desk gleam. Elena, I need your best work. He'd leaned forward, eyes intense. The board is breathing down my neck. Revenue is down 18%. Investors are getting nervous. I need someone I can trust to fix this. I'd felt a surge of pride. Someone he could trust. What do you need? A complete operational restructuring. Everything. Departments, processes, cost structures. I want you to tear it apart and build it back better. He'd smiled then, warm and genuine. Or so I'd thought. You're the only person here with the vision to do this. I'd left that meeting walking on air. Finally, a chance to prove myself at the highest level. Finally, recognition for all those years of grinding work. I'd called my mother that night. This is my shot, Mom. This is everything. The late nights started immediately. My laptop screen became my closest companion, glowing in the darkness of my home office at 2, 3, sometimes 4 in the morning. Numbers swam before my tired eyes as I built financial models, analyzed departmental efficiency, and mapped out restructuring scenarios. My son would find me asleep at my desk some mornings, coffee cold in its cup. "Mommy works too hard," he'd say, wrapping his small arms around my neck. I'd hug him back, breathing in the scent of his strawberry shampoo. "Just for a little while longer, baby. Then things will get better." The plan consumed me. I interviewed every department head, reviewed 5 years of operational data, and created 3 different restructuring models. The work was brilliant. I knew it was brilliant. Even Mark's usual criticisms dried up as I presented preliminary findings. "This is exactly what we need," he'd said during one late evening meeting. His praise felt like oxygen. I'd smile, exhausted but energized, and dive back into the data. I never noticed how carefully he was watching me work, how he took notes on everything I said. The whispers started in month 3. I was in the break room making coffee when I overheard 2 managers talking. "Did you hear Mark's presentation to the board yesterday? Those optimization ideas were incredible." "Yeah, funny how they sound exactly like what Elena's been working on." They'd stop talking when they saw me. I'd laughed it off. "If the company wins, I win," I'd said, stirring sugar into my coffee with more force than necessary. But my assistant Maria had given me a long look later that day. "Elena, are you keeping records of your work? Like, proof it's yours?" "Why would I need that?" She'd hesitated. "Just be careful. I've seen this before." I dismissed her concern with a wave. Mark was my boss, my mentor. He'd promoted me twice. He wouldn't steal my work. That would be career suicide for him. The board would know. The executives would know. I was being paranoid. But that night, I'd quietly started saving copies of everything to my personal drive. Just in case. The instinct that saved me, though I didn't know it yet. The investor meeting was in month 4. I wasn't invited to present, which stung, but Mark assured me it was standard. "You focus on finishing the plan. I'll handle the investors." I'd watched from my office as he walked into the conference room carrying a tablet. My tablet. With my slides. An hour later, I'd pulled up the investor relations page on my laptop. Mark had posted a summary of his presentation. Every chart was mine. Every recommendation came from my analysis. But my name appeared nowhere. Not in the credits. Not in the acknowledgments. Not even in the tiny footnote text. Just prepared by the executive leadership team. My hands had shaken as I scrolled through the document. He'd even used my specific phrasing. Strategic operational realignment with targeted cost optimization. That was my sentence. My words. At the next executive meeting, Mark had smiled at everyone. My team worked tirelessly on this analysis. His eyes had met mine across the table. There was something in that look. A challenge, maybe. Or a warning. I'd forced a smile back, heart pounding. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. Harold Chin found me in the parking garage after work that evening. He was the CFO, 20 years with the company, and the closest thing I had to a mentor. "Elena." His voice was quiet. "We need to talk." We'd sat in his car while rain drummed on the roof. Harold had loosened his tie, looking older than his 58 years. "Mark is setting you up." I'd laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Harold, that's paranoid."
He needs me.
"The plan isn't finished yet." "Exactly." Harold had turned to face me. "He needs you until the plan is done. Then you become a liability." "A liability? I'm the one who designed it." which means you're the one who can prove it's yours. You're also expensive. Senior level salary, stock options, bonus structure.
He'd paused.
And you're the only one who really understands how all the pieces fit together. My stomach had twisted. He wouldn't. The board would never approve firing me after this. Harold's expression was grim. The board will approve whatever saves the money, especially if Mark presents it as part of your own restructuring plan. I'd sat in silence, processing. What do I do? Document everything, and be ready to move fast when this goes sideways. The final 2 days before the presentation were a blur. I slept maybe 4 hours total, surviving on coffee and pure anxiety. My restructuring model was complete. 100 slides, 50 pages of supporting documentation, and implementation timelines stretching over 18 months. It was perfect. It would save $22 million annually while actually improving operational efficiency. The night before the presentation, I'd practiced in my living room until midnight. My son had watched from the couch, half asleep. You're going to be great, Mommy. I'd tucked him into bed, then returned to my laptop for final adjustments. At some point, I'd fallen asleep at my desk. I'd woken to my phone alarm, sunlight streaming through the windows, and a text from my ex-husband. Heard about your big presentation. Don't screw it up. I'd deleted the message without responding. That morning, I'd stood in front of my mirror, straightening my navy blazer. The woman looking back at me was confident, prepared, ready. She had no idea what was about to happen. None at all. The boardroom was cold despite the morning sunlight. 9 people sat around the mahogany table. Mark at the head, looking relaxed. Harold to his left, expression carefully neutral. 7 other executives and board members, all watching me with polite attention. I'd connected my laptop to the projector with steady hands. Good morning. Today I'm presenting the operational restructuring plan that will position Ellison Group for sustainable growth. My voice was strong, professional. I'd clicked through the slides, walking them through the analysis. Revenue trends, cost structures, operational inefficiencies. The room was silent except for my voice and the occasional scratch of someone taking notes. I'd reached slide 32 when I noticed Mark leaning back in his chair, arms crossed. Not in a negative way. More like someone watching a performance they'd already seen. Slide 45 covered department consolidations. Slide 63 outlined the timeline. Slide 78 showed projected savings. Phase 3, I'd said, clicking to the next slide, involves role realignment across senior leadership to eliminate redundancy and reduce overhead. That's when Mark had interrupted. Speaking of roles, Elena. Every head in the room had turned toward me. And I'd known. Somehow I'd known. Your position has been made redundant. The words hung in the air like smoke. Someone coughed. A chair creaked. The projector hummed. I'd stood there, presentation clicker in my hand, and felt my entire world tilt sideways. I'm sorry. My voice was barely a whisper. Mark's expression was professionally sympathetic. The restructuring plan you've designed is excellent, but it includes significant reduction in senior leadership costs. We've decided to eliminate the Chief Strategy Officer role, the role I currently hold. Yes. The silence was suffocating. I'd looked around the table. Some people stared at their notepads. Others met my eyes with obvious discomfort. Only Harold looked directly at me, his expression saying, I told you so. So you're firing me, I'd said slowly, using a plan that I designed. A plan that specifically recommends eliminating my own position. Mark had shifted in his chair. It's not personal, Elena. It's exactly what the company needs. You said so yourself in your analysis. Something had snapped into place then. The removed name from presentations. The careful documentation of team work instead of my work. He'd planned this. All of it. Oh, Mark, I'd heard myself say, voice steady now. It's always personal. I'd finished the presentation. Not because I had to, but because I refused to let him see me break. I'd clicked through the remaining slides with mechanical precision, explaining implementation phases and projected outcomes to a room that could barely look at me. When I'd reached the final slide, I'd closed my laptop slowly. Any questions? Silence. Mark had cleared his throat. Thank you, Elena. This is exceptional work. Sharon from HR will meet you in your office to discuss next steps. I nodded once.
Picked up my laptop.
Walked to the door with my head high. In the hallway, my legs had nearly given out. I'd leaned against the wall, breathing slowly, trying to keep my breakfast down. Maria had found me there. Elena? I'd straightened immediately. I'm fine. Just need to pack my office. She'd followed me silently, tears streaming down her face, while I'd filled a cardboard box with the pieces of my professional life. My industry awards. Photos of my son. The coffee mug that said, "Nevertheless," she persisted. The irony was almost funny. Almost. When security had escorted me to my car, I'd held that box like it contained something precious instead of the remnants of my shattered career. The first week was the hardest. I'd wake at 6:30 out of habit, reaching for my phone to check work emails before remembering I didn't have work anymore. My son would find me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. "Mommy, are you okay?" "I'm fine, baby." But I wasn't fine. I was drowning. My mother had called daily. "Sue them. You have to sue them." For what? They used my own plan to fire me. It's legal. It's not right. Since when does that matter? I'd started updating my resume, but the words felt hollow. Designed comprehensive restructuring plan that resulted in $22 million in annual savings and my own termination. How exactly did you spin that? At night, I'd pull up the company website and read the press releases. Ellison Group announces bold restructuring initiative. Mark's smiling photo next to quotes about innovative leadership and strategic vision. My vision. My leadership. Zero mentions of me. I'd close my laptop and sit in the darkness, wondering if I'd ever work in this industry again. Who would hire someone fired during their own restructuring? The answer felt obvious, no one. On day 9, I'd force myself to look at my copy of the restructuring plan. Really look at it. I'd opened the financial models and started tracing the numbers. Something felt wrong. The implementation timeline Mark had announced in press releases didn't match my recommendations. I'd suggested an 18-month rollout with specific checkpoints. He was doing it in 6 months. My mouse had hovered over the department consolidation tab. I designed careful transitions with training periods and overlap to prevent knowledge loss. Mark was doing immediate cuts. I'd sat back in my chair, mind racing. He was rushing it, skipping the safety measures I'd built in. The plan would work my way. His way, it would implode. And when it did, whose name would be on it?
Mine.
I was the architect. I designed it. When it failed, I'd be blamed for faulty planning. Mark would shake his head sadly and say, "We trusted her analysis. Clearly, there were flaws we didn't catch." He wasn't just stealing my work. He was setting me up to take the fall for its failure. The realization hit me like cold water. I'd opened a new document and started taking notes. If this was going to explode, I needed proof of what I'd actually recommended. 2 weeks after my firing, the first cracks appeared. I'd been checking the company's stock price obsessively, watching for signs. On Tuesday, shares dropped 4%. The stated reason was concerns about restructuring implementation. I'd pulled up the employee review site where current and former staff posted anonymously. The comments from that week were brutal. They fired everyone who knew how anything worked. Now nobody knows how to do their jobs. 3 people are doing the work of 8. The quality is tanking. Clients are complaining about delayed responses and errors. This restructuring is a disaster. I'd screenshot everything. Saved it to a folder marked documentation.
My phone had rung.
Unknown number. I'd almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Is this Ms. Elena Ward?" A man's voice, professional. "This is she." "My name is Richard Torres. I'm a senior analyst with Devon Capital. We're one of the primary investors in Ellison Group." My heart had stopped. "We'd like to speak with you about the recent operational changes. Would you be available for a meeting?" I'd forced my voice to stay calm. "Of course. When were you thinking?" "Thursday, 2 p.m. Our downtown office." When I'd hung up, My hands were shaking. But this time, it wasn't from fear. Devon Capital's offices occupied 3 floors of a glass tower downtown. I dressed carefully. Gray suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back. Professional but not trying too hard. Richard Torres met me in the lobby. Mid-50s, sharp suit, handshake like iron. Ms. Ward, thank you for coming. 2 other people joined us in the conference room. Margaret Sung, portfolio manager. David Breslin, senior partner. They'd arranged themselves on one side of the table. I'd sat across from them, back straight, hands folded. We appreciate your time, Margaret had begun. We've been reviewing Ellison Group's restructuring implementation. We understand you were recently separated from the company. That's correct. We also understand, David had added, that you were instrumental in designing the restructuring plan. I'd chosen my words carefully. I designed the operational analysis and recommendations that formed the basis of the current restructuring, yes. Richard had slid a tablet across the table. We've been tracking implementation. The timeline is extremely aggressive. Departments are being consolidated with minimal transition periods. Key personnel are being terminated without knowledge transfer protocols. He'd paused. This doesn't seem like sound strategy. I'd looked at the data on the screen, recognized my own analysis buried under Mark's rushed implementation. No, I'd said quietly. It's not. Walk us through what you actually recommended. Margaret had leaned forward, pen poised over her notepad. And I told them. Everything. The 18-month timeline with built-in checkpoints. The knowledge transfer protocols. The training periods before role eliminations. The specific sequence for department consolidations. You're saying the current implementation doesn't follow your plan? David had asked. It follows the broad strokes. But it's missing every safety measure I designed. I'd pulled out my laptop. May I? At their nod, I'd connected to their screen and pulled up my original models. For the next hour, I'd walked them through my actual recommendations versus what Mark was implementing. Every deviation, every shortcut, every risk he was taking. They'd ask sharp questions. I'd answered with data. No emotion, no bitterness, just facts and analysis. When I'd finished, Richard had sat back in his chair. Why didn't you raise these concerns while you were still with the company? I did. Multiple times. But the decision was made to accelerate implementation. I'd paused. And then my role was eliminated as part of the cost-cutting measures I'd recommended. The looks they'd exchanged told me everything. They understood exactly what had happened. Ms. Ward, Margaret had said carefully, would you be willing to provide this analysis in writing? For our internal review. I'd smiled slightly. Of course. I'd spent the weekend writing the most important document of my career. Not for Mark. Not for Ellison Group. For the investors who held the company's future in their hands. 20 pages of clinical analysis. What I'd recommended versus what was being implemented. Projected outcomes of my plan versus projected outcomes of Mark's rushed version. Risk assessments. Data models. Financial projections. 0 emotional language. 0 personal grievances. Just cold, hard analysis that showed Mark was driving the company toward a cliff. I'd sent it to Richard on Sunday evening. His response came Monday morning. This is extremely helpful. We'll be in touch. Tuesday, Ellison Group stock dropped another 6%. Whispers started appearing in industry publications. Sources close to the company suggest implementation challenges. Wednesday, I'd received a LinkedIn message from a former colleague. Elena, what's happening here? Mark's in emergency meetings with the board. Everyone's panicking. I hadn't responded. Thursday morning, my phone had rung. Richard Torres again. Ms. Ward, Devon Capital is conducting a formal review of Ellison Group's operational decisions. The board has requested our assessment before their quarterly meeting. He'd paused. They want you there. I'm sorry, what? The board wants to hear directly from you about the restructuring plan. Both what you recommended and what's being implemented. My coffee had gone cold in my hand. When? Next Tuesday. 9 a.m. Same boardroom where you gave your final presentation. The irony was too perfect to be accidental. The days before the meeting crawled by. I'd rehearsed my presentation until I could recite it in my sleep. But this time, I wasn't presenting to save my job. I was presenting to save my reputation. Mark had called Sunday evening. I'd stared at his name on my screen for 3 rings before answering. Elena. His voice was tight. I heard you've been talking to our investors. They reached out to me. About what, exactly? About the restructuring plan. The one I designed. Silence. Then, you need to understand something. The board approved this implementation timeline. If you undermine it, you're undermining the entire company.
I'd laughed. Couldn't help it.
I'm not undermining anything, Mark. I'm telling the truth about what I actually recommended versus what you're doing. There could be legal implications. Breach of confidentiality. Interference with business operations. I sign no such agreements. And I'm sharing my own work, not company secrets. Another pause. Don't do this, Elena. You'll never work in this industry again. Maybe. But at least I'll be able to live with myself. I'd hung up before he could respond. My hands had been shaking, but not from fear. From something else. Something that felt almost like power. Tuesday morning arrived with clear skies and cold wind. I dressed in the same navy suit I'd worn for my firing. Seemed appropriate. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt different this time. I wasn't an employee anymore. I was a consultant. An expert witness. The person with answers they desperately needed. Sharon from HR had been waiting in the lobby. Her expression was complicated. Ms. Ward, they're ready for you. The boardroom looked exactly the same. Same mahogany table. Same leather chairs. But the people were different. The full board of directors. Richard, Margaret, and David from Devon Capital. Harold, looking exhausted. And Mark, sitting at the head of the table with his jaw clenched so tight, I could see the muscles jumping. Ms. Ward. The board chairman, Robert Keating, gestured to a seat. Thank you for coming. I'd set up my laptop with steady hands. Connected to the projector. Opened my presentation. Mark's eyes had burned into the side of my face. Let's begin, Robert had said. And I had. This time, nobody interrupted me. This time, I presented the whole truth. My actual plan. Mark's implementation. The deviations. The risks. The projected outcomes. The silence in the room was absolute except for my voice and the click of slides advancing. I'd reached the financial projections when Mark had finally spoken. This analysis is speculative at best. We're only 8 weeks into implementation. I'd turned to face him. The current client satisfaction scores are down 22%. Employee turnover has increased 40%. Project delivery delays have doubled. I'd clicked to the next slide. Those aren't speculations. Those are your own internal metrics from last week. His face had gone red. How did you? I designed the tracking systems, Mark. I know what metrics matter. Margaret had leaned forward. Mr. Ellison, is Ms. Ward's characterization of the implementation timeline accurate? Mark had straightened his tie. We made necessary adjustments to accelerate the benefits. You eliminated the transition protocols, I'd said quietly. The knowledge transfer periods. The training phases. Everything designed to prevent exactly what's happening now. That's a matter of interpretation. It's a matter of documentation. I'd pulled up side-by-side comparisons. My original recommendations. His implementation timeline. The deviations were stark and undeniable. Robert had studied the screen for a long moment. Mr. Ellison, why wasn't the board informed that the implementation deviated significantly from the original plan? We felt the accelerated approach was Ms. Ward consulted about these changes before her termination? Silence. Mark's jaw worked.
No.
Why not? Her role had been eliminated. There was no need. Her role was eliminated, David interrupted, the same day she presented the plan. A plan that, based on this analysis, you've significantly altered without expert consultation. The walls were closing in. I could see it in Mark's eyes. The meeting lasted 4 hours. They'd asked detailed questions about every aspect of the implementation. Mark had tried to deflect, to justify, to blame operational challenges on external factors. But the data didn't lie. My projections had been accurate. His shortcuts were causing exactly the problems I'd warned about. When they'd finally dismissed us, Harold had caught my arm in the hallway. "That was brutal," he'd whispered. "Necessary." He'd smiled slightly. "I'm glad you documented everything." 3 days later, the announcement came. Mark Ellison to step down as CEO for personal reasons. The press release was professionally vague, but I'd received a call from Richard that afternoon. The board has asked Devon Capital to oversee a corrective implementation of the restructuring plan. Your original plan, with the proper timeline and protocols. He'd paused. "They want to offer you a consulting contract. To do what exactly?" "Supervise the implementation. Train the team. Fix what's been broken." I'd close my eyes. For how long? 12 months initially, with option to extend. The number he'd quoted for the contract had made me sit down. It was more than my annual salary had been. "They're also prepared to make a public statement acknowledging your role in designing the restructuring plan. Attribution, credit, everything that should have been there from the start." I'd looked out my apartment window at the city skyline. "I'll need to review the contract terms." "Of course. Take your time." But I'd already decided. Not for revenge. Not even for vindication. For closure. My first day back, I'd walked through those glass doors with my head high. Temporary consultant badge instead of employee ID. Guest parking instead of my old reserved spot. The whispers had started immediately. Maria had hugged me in the hallway, crying. "I knew you'd be back." But I wasn't back. Not really. I was there to fix what had been broken. To implement what I'd designed. To prove that my plan would work if done correctly. The new interim CEO, brought in by the board, had greeted me professionally. "Ms. Ward, we're grateful for your expertise." We'd spent the first week undoing Mark's shortcuts, restoring transition timelines, implementing proper knowledge transfer, bringing back some of the people who'd been fired too quickly. The remaining staff had watched with cautious hope. Slowly, metrics had started improving. Client satisfaction stabilized. Employee turnover slowed. Projects got back on schedule.
It wasn't dramatic.
It wasn't fast, but it was working. Exactly as I designed it to. 3 months in, I'd been reviewing reports when Richard had called. The board approved the extension. "They want you for another year minimum." I'd smiled. "We'll see. Let me finish this phase first." "Fair enough. But Elena?" "Yes. Thank you. For not walking away. For being professional when you had every right to burn it all down." After he'd hung up, I'd sat quietly for a moment. He was right. I could have destroyed them. Could have gone to the press. Could have made Mark's failure as public and humiliating as my firing had been. But that wasn't who I was. 6 months after my return, I stood in that same boardroom for my final presentation as a consultant. The restructuring was complete. Properly implemented. The company was stable, profitable, positioned for growth. My job was done. The board had offered me a permanent position. Chief Operating Officer. Corner office. Full executive benefits. I'd thanked them and declined. This was never about coming back, I'd explained. It was about proving the plan worked. And it does. Robert had smiled. "What will you do now?" I'd thought about that carefully. "I'm starting my own consulting firm. Operational restructuring for mid-sized companies. Companies that need strategic planning, not corporate politics." On my last day, I'd cleaned out the temporary office they'd given me, packed up my laptop, said goodbye to colleagues who'd become friends again. In the parking garage, I'd paused beside my car and looked back at the building. 8 years of my life. 18 months of brutal work. 3 months of unemployment. 6 months of restoration. It was done. My phone had buzzed. A text from my son. "Pizza tonight to celebrate?" I'd smiled and typed back. "Absolutely." As I'd driven away, I'd felt something I hadn't felt in over a year.
Peace.
Not because I'd won. Not because Mark had lost. But because I'd proven something more important than revenge. I'd proven that good work, done right, eventually speaks for itself. Even when you have to wait for people to finally listen.